Well, Frasier was a giant accomplishment, you know, honestly. Actors get wary about, you know, successful characters.
So you're saying I lack self-awareness?
Why don't we change the subject, all right?
Every time Aunt Patrice comes to visit, Maris makes all these plans, then she dives under the duvet with a 2-week migraine, and I'm left holding the bag. Literally and figuratively.
37 Emmy Awards. 5 consecutive wins for Outstanding Comedy Series, a record that stood for decades. Critical acclaim so overwhelming that TV Guide called it one of the greatest shows ever made. For 11 years, from 1993 to 2004, Frasier dominated awards shows, impressed critics, and convinced the television industry that it was witnessing greatness. And then it ended. And something strange happened. Nothing. No cultural legacy. No iconic catchphrases that people still quote. No Halloween costumes, no TikTok trends, no passionate Reddit debates. Just silence. Go to any party today and ask people to name the greatest sitcoms of all time. They'll say Friends, Seinfeld, The Office, Cheers, maybe even How I Met Your Mother. But Frasier, the show that won more Emmys than any of them, the show that critics worshipped. Most people under 30 have never seen an episode. Most people over 30 barely remember it existed. And the ones who do remember it can't quite explain why a show that was so celebrated, so awarded, so praised, left almost no mark on popular culture. This is the story of Frasier. The sitcom that proved you can win every award, impress every critic, and still be forgotten by the people who actually matter, the audience. This is the story of a show built on intellectual snobbery that mocked elitism while simultaneously celebrating it. A show about a psychiatrist who dispensed advice to strangers on the radio but couldn't figure out his own life. A show where a working-class father was the only sane person in a house full of pretentious intellectuals, and yet the show spent 11 years laughing at him instead of learning from him. This is the story of Kelsey Grammer, an actor who played a man obsessed with appearing perfect while his own life was falling apart from addiction, arrests, and rehab stints. And this is the story of how in 2023, when they tried to bring Frasier back, when they spent millions on a revival, it failed so spectacularly that it was cancelled after just 2 seasons, because nostalgia isn't enough. Awards aren't enough. And sometimes, the shows we celebrate aren't the shows we actually love. Don't forget to hit follow, because what comes next will make you question every Emmy win you've ever trusted and force you to ask. If a sitcom wins 37 awards but nobody watches it 20 years later, did it actually matter? Or was it just the television equivalent of an expensive wine that critics praise but nobody actually enjoys drinking? September 16, 1993, NBC launches Frasier, a spin-off of Cheers, one of the most beloved sitcoms in American history. Cheers had ended just months earlier after 11 seasons, and the network needed something to fill the void. So they took Dr. Frasier Crane, a character who had been a recurring psychiatrist on Cheers, and gave him his own show. But they made a crucial decision. They didn't just transplant him to a new city, they rebuilt him from scratch. In Cheers, Frasier was a supporting character, a pretentious intellectual, sure, but grounded by the working-class energy of the bar and the people in it. In Frasier, they removed that grounding. They moved him to Seattle. They gave him a radio show where he dispenses psychological advice. They surrounded him with people just as pretentious as he is. His brother Niles, an even snobbier psychiatrist. His producer Roz, cynical and sharp. And then, to create conflict, they dropped his father into his life, Martin Crane, ex-cop, retired after being shot in the line of duty, beer-drinking, baseball-loving, no-nonsense working-class man, the polar opposite of his sons. Frasier and Niles are intellectuals who drink wine, attend the opera, quote Freud, and obsess over art and culture. Martin watches cop shows, drinks cheap beer, and thinks his sons are ridiculous. And the show's central tension is born. High culture versus low culture, intellectualism versus common sense, pretension versus authenticity. And for 11 years, Frasier plays this tension for laughs. But here's what the show never quite figured out, and what audiences instinctively understood even if critics didn't. Martin was right, almost always. He was the voice of reason, the grounded one, the one who saw through the bullshit. And yet the show treated him like the punchline, like the embarrassing dad who didn't understand fine dining or classical music. The joke was supposed to be that Frasier and Niles were ridiculous snobs, but the show also wanted us to admire their sophistication, to laugh at their pretension, while also being impressed by it. And that contradiction is why Frasier never truly connected with audiences the way other sitcoms did. Let's talk about the setup. Frasier moves back to Seattle after his marriage falls apart. He's a divorced psychiatrist trying to rebuild his life. He gets a job as a radio host, dispensing advice to callers with problems. His producer is Roz Doyle, a woman with a sharp tongue and a complicated love life. His brother Niles is married to a woman named Maris, who we never see on screen, a running joke that becomes one of the show's trademarks. Maris is described in increasingly absurd ways, so much so that the writers eventually realized no actress could ever live up to the image they'd created, so they just kept her invisible forever. Niles is hopelessly in love with Daphne Moon, the eccentric British woman hired to be Martin's physical therapist after his injury. And Martin himself reluctantly moves into Frasier's expensive, meticulously decorated apartment, bringing with him a hideous recliner that Frasier hates, and a dog named Eddie, who stares at Frasier in a way that suggests he sees right through him. The comedy comes from misunderstandings, dinner parties that go wrong, romantic disasters, and the constant clash between Frasier's desire to appear cultured and sophisticated and the reality that he's deeply insecure, lonely, and emotionally stunted. It's a farce, a theatrical, carefully constructed farce where doors open and close at the wrong times, secrets are revealed at the worst moments, and everyone's ego gets punctured by the end of the episode. And for critics, it was heaven. Because Frasier wasn't just funny, it was smart. Or at least it wanted you to think it was smart. The dialogue was filled with references to opera, literature, wine, Freud, Jung, philosophy. The humor was verbal, not physical. The characters spoke in complete sentences, referenced high culture and never dumbed themselves down. And television critics, many of whom saw themselves as intellectuals, loved it. They saw Frasier as proof that sitcoms could be sophisticated, that comedy didn't have to be lowbrow, that you could make people laugh while also making them feel smart. And the awards poured in. In its first season, Frasier won the Emmy for Outstanding Comedy Series, and then it won again, and again, and again, and again. 5 consecutive years. 1994, 1995, 1996, 1997, 1998. A record that wouldn't be matched until Modern Family did the same thing decades later. Kelsey Grammer won multiple Emmys for his performance. David Hyde Pierce, who played Niles, became one of the most celebrated supporting actors in television history. The writing won. The directing won. By the time Frasier ended in 2004, it had accumulated 37 Emmy Awards, making it the most awarded sitcom in television history. Critics called it flawless, a masterpiece, the best-written comedy ever made. And yet, while all of this was happening, something else was also happening. The general public was watching other shows. Friends premiered in 1994, 1 year after Frasier. It became a cultural phenomenon. People dressed like the characters. They quoted the lines. They argued about Ross and Rachel. They got the Rachel haircut. Seinfeld was in its prime, redefining what sitcoms could be. The Simpsons was a cultural juggernaut. And later, The Office, Parks and Recreation, 30 Rock all became shows that people didn't just watch, they obsessed over. They made memes about. They rewatched endlessly. But Frasier was the show that won all the awards and then quietly faded from memory. Because here's the truth that nobody wanted to say out loud. Frasier was a show for critics. It was a show for people who wanted to feel smart while watching TV. It was a show that appealed to a very specific demographic, educated, upper middle class, mostly white, mostly older. And it never broke out of that bubble. It never became universal. Because at its core, Frasier was a show about rich people with rich people problems. And no matter how clever the writing was, no matter how sharp the dialogue, audiences didn't care about Frasier's struggles to find the perfect wine or Niles's anxiety about his country club membership or the endless parade of dinner parties gone wrong. And here's the uncomfortable truth that the show never fully confronted. Martin, the working-class dad, was the only character most people could relate to. He was the one who said what everyone was thinking, that his sons were ridiculous, that their obsession with status and culture was exhausting, that life didn't have to be so complicated. And yet the show treated Martin like the outsider, the one who didn't get it, the punchline, when the real joke should have been on Frasier and Niles. But the show loved them too much to truly skewer them. It mocked their pretension, sure, but it also admired it. It wanted you to laugh at Frasier's intellectual snobbery while also being impressed by his knowledge of opera. It wanted you to see Niles as ridiculous but also sophisticated. And that mixed message, that inability to fully commit to either mocking or celebrating elitism, is why Frasier never resonated the way it should have. Now let's talk about what was happening behind the scenes. Because while Frasier was winning Emmy after Emmy, while Kelsey Grammer was playing a character who had his life meticulously together, Grammer's real life was falling apart. During the late 80s and throughout the 90s, Kelsey Grammer struggled with addiction, alcohol, cocaine. He was arrested multiple times for DUI. He went to rehab. He relapsed. He went back to rehab. He got arrested again. And through all of it, he kept working. He kept showing up on set. He kept delivering flawless performances as Dr. Frasier Crane, a man who dispensed wisdom and control and intellectual superiority. And nobody watching would have known that the actor playing him was barely holding his life together. His colleagues have said that Grammer was a consummate professional, that he never let his personal chaos affect his work, that he could walk onto set after a night of drinking and deliver a perfect take. And maybe that's why his performance as Frasier is so good, because he understood, on a deep level, what it meant to present a perfect exterior while being broken inside. Frasier Crane is a man obsessed with appearances, with being seen as cultured, intelligent, successful. But underneath he's insecure, lonely, desperate for love and validation. And Kelsey Grammer didn't have to act that part. He lived it. And here's something most people don't know. David Hyde Pierce, the actor who played Niles, wasn't supposed to exist. The original concept for Frasier didn't include a brother. But during casting, someone showed the producers a photo of Pierce, and they were struck by how much he looked like a younger Kelsey Grammer. So they created Niles almost on the spot. They wrote a character specifically for Pierce, and it became one of the best decisions in sitcom history, because Niles wasn't just Frasier's brother, he was Frasier's mirror. Everything Frasier was, Niles was more pretentious, more neurotic, more insecure. And the dynamic between them, the rivalry, the love, the constant one-upmanship, became the emotional core of the show. Niles' unrequited love for Daphne, the physical therapist, lasted for years. He pined for her while trapped in a loveless marriage to the invisible Maris. And when they finally got together, when Niles and Daphne became a couple, it was one of the few genuinely emotional moments in a show that often prioritized cleverness over heart. But even that relationship exposes one of Frasier's fundamental problems. Daphne, the working-class British woman, was treated as an object of desire, but also as slightly ridiculous. Her mysticism, her eccentric family, her working-class background, all of it was played for laughs. She was never quite taken seriously, just like Martin was never quite taken seriously. The show wanted us to root for Niles and Daphne, but it also wanted us to see Niles as elevating her by choosing her, as if his sophistication was a gift he was bestowing on her. And that paternalistic attitude runs through the entire series. The working class is charming, quaint, well-meaning, but ultimately they need the educated elite to guide them, to teach them, to show them the right way to live. And that message, whether intentional or not, is why Frasier feels dated now, why it doesn't hold up the way other sitcoms do, because we've moved past the idea that intellectualism equals superiority. We've stopped believing that knowing about wine and opera makes you better than someone who drinks beer and watches football. And the show itself seemed to know this on some level, because the best episodes of Frasier are the ones where Frasier and Niles are humiliated, where their plans fall apart, where their pretension gets them into trouble. The audience loved watching them fail, loved seeing them taken down a peg. But the show never quite learned the lesson. It kept coming back to the same formula. Frasier and Niles think they're better than everyone. Something goes wrong, they're embarrassed. And then, instead of growing, instead of changing, they just reset and do it all over again the next week. There's no real growth, no transformation, just the same cycle of ego, failure, brief humility, and then ego again. And after 11 years of that, audiences were tired. They'd seen it all before. And when the show ended in 2004, people moved on. They didn't miss it. They didn't demand a reunion, they just let it go. For almost 20 years, Frasier lived in the past, a show that people remembered winning a lot of Emmys, but couldn't quite remember why. And then, in 2023, Paramount Plus decided to bring it back. A revival, a reboot, a continuation. Kelsey Grammer returned as Frasier, now older, moving back to Boston to reconnect with his adult son, Freddie. The premise was promising. Frasier, the intellectual snob, trying to bond with a son who chose to be a firefighter, a working-class job, the kind of job Martin would have respected, the kind of job Frasier would have looked down on. It should have been interesting. It should have been a chance to finally explore the class tensions the original show danced around, but never fully confronted. But it didn't work. The writing was flat. The new cast didn't click. And most importantly, the world had moved on. The audience that loved Frasier in the 90s was older now, and they didn't need a revival. And the younger audience that binges Friends and The Office on streaming had no nostalgia for a show about a pretentious radio psychiatrist. The revival was cancelled after 2 seasons, quietly, without much fanfare. And that failure is more revealing than any success, because it proved what many had suspected all along. Frasier's awards, its critical acclaim, its reputation as one of the greatest sitcoms ever made, none of it translated into actual love, actual loyalty, actual cultural relevance. People didn't miss Frasier the way they missed other shows. They didn't rewatch it endlessly, they didn't quote it. They didn't dress up as the characters for Halloween. It won 37 Emmys and left almost no cultural footprint. And that raises the most important question of all. What does it mean to be great? Is a show great because critics say it is, because it wins awards? Or is a show great because people love it, because it becomes part of the culture, because 20 years later people still care? Frasier won every award and nobody remembers it. Friends never won the Emmy for Outstanding Comedy, not once, and it's one of the most beloved shows in television history. The Office was constantly overlooked by awards shows, and it's the most streamed sitcom in the world. Seinfeld won some Emmys, sure, but it was never the critics' darling the way Frasier was, and yet Seinfeld is quoted daily. It shaped comedy for a generation. It's still relevant, still funny, still alive in the culture. So what happened to Frasier? How does a show win 37 Emmys and then vanish? The answer is simple. Frasier was made for the people who give out awards. It was made for critics, for television executives, for the industry itself. It was a show that made people feel smart for watching it. That rewarded viewers for getting the references, for understanding the jokes, for appreciating the sophisticated dialogue. But it never made people feel. It never made them cry. It never made them fall in love with the characters the way they fell in love with Ross and Rachel, or Jim and Pam, or even Sam and Diane from Cheers, the show that Frasier spun off from. And here's the tragic irony. The best character on Frasier, the one people actually connected with, was Martin, the working-class dad, the one the show treated as the outsider. John Mahoney, the actor who played him, brought warmth, humor, and humanity to a show that often felt cold and calculated. He was the heart. And when he died in 2018, the possibility of a true Frasier reunion died with him. Because without Martin, without that grounding presence, Frasier and Niles are just 2 wealthy, neurotic men complaining about their problems. And nobody wants to watch that, not anymore. Not in a world where wealth inequality is at an all-time high. Not in a world where people are struggling to pay rent, to afford healthcare, to survive. Watching 2 rich psychiatrists argue about which wine to serve at dinner isn't funny. It's tone-deaf, and that's why the revival failed, because the world changed, and Frasier didn't. So here's the lesson. The uncomfortable, unavoidable lesson that Frasier teaches us. Awards don't matter. Not really, not in the long run. They matter to the industry. They matter to critics. They matter to actors' resumes and producers' egos, but they don't matter to audiences. Because audiences don't love shows because they won Emmys. They love shows because those shows made them feel something, because they saw themselves in the characters, because the show spoke to something real in their lives. And Frasier, for all its wit, for all its cleverness, for all its sophisticated dialogue, never did that. It spoke to a very small, very specific audience. Educated, upper middle class, people who wanted to feel smart while watching TV, and that audience gave it awards. But they didn't give it their hearts. They didn't make it part of their lives. They didn't love it the way people love the shows that actually matter. And there's a deeper lesson here too, about class, about elitism, about the danger of thinking you're better than other people because you know more about wine or opera or Freud. Because Frasier and Niles spent 11 years looking down on their father, judging him for his tastes, his interests, his lifestyle, and the show played it for laughs. But it also validated it. It said, yes, these men are ridiculous, but they're also kind of right. They are more sophisticated. They do know more. They are in some fundamental way better. And Martin, for all his common sense, for all his wisdom, was still treated as the dad who didn't get it, who needed to be tolerated, who was amusing but ultimately less than. And that's the ugly truth at the heart of Frasier. It mocked elitism while also celebrating it. It wanted to have it both ways. And in trying to do both, it failed to do either convincingly. The show ended in 2004, the revival failed in 2025, and in between, Frasier became a footnote, a trivia answer. What show won the most Emmys? Frasier. Oh, I forgot about that show. And maybe that's the most fitting legacy. A show about a man obsessed with being remembered, with being important, with being seen as superior, is now barely remembered at all. While the shows it looked down on, the shows that were messy and emotional and imperfect, are still loved, still watched, still alive. Because in the end, people don't remember perfect. They remember real. They remember human. They remember the shows that made them feel less alone. And Frasier, for all its awards, never did that. It made people feel smart, but it never made them feel seen. If this story made you rethink what makes a show truly great, if it made you question whether awards actually mean anything, don't stay silent. Like, share and subscribe so we can keep asking the questions the industry doesn't want us to ask. Because sometimes the most awarded shows aren't the best shows. Sometimes they're just the shows that made the right people feel important. And Frasier is proof that you can win every award, impress every critic, and still be forgotten by the people who actually matter. The audience. Because in the end, they're the only judges that count. And they've already delivered their verdict. 37 Emmys. And nobody cares. All data, analysis, and commentary in this video are presented based on historical research and publicly available information. This video examines the cultural impact and legacy of Frasier as a piece of television history, and its complex relationship with class, awards, and lasting relevance.